Welcome to another Origin seminar, and today's speaker will be Genaro Suarez, and with the title of Explaining the Diversity of Extrasolar Worlds. And Genaro, the floor is yours. And our speaker today will prefer to be interrupted. If you have any questions, just raise your hand or just speak out if you're in the room, and I can handle the questions on the fly.
Perfect. So thanks for the introduction, and hi everyone. Thanks to the organizer, in particular to Serena, for allowing me to present my research. I'm Genaro Suarez, a postdoc at the American Museum of Natural History in the Brown Dwarfs in New York City research group. And today I'm going to talk about results that we have that are helping us to explain the diversity of extrasolar worlds, in particular brown dwarf atmospheres, in collaboration with this team. So first, I'm going to introduce brown dwarfs. So brown dwarfs are substellar objects, but superplanetary in mass. They are the link between low mass stars and gas giant planets. And unlike stars, brown dwarfs have insufficient mass to sustain a stable hydrogen fusion in their cores, so they cool with time, as we can see in this figure, while they also dim and contract. So as a consequence of this evolution, there is a degeneracy between their fundamental parameters. For example, for young brown dwarf, warm brown dwarfs, they have a mass of a few Jupiter masses, and similarly warm but older brown dwarfs have a mass of several tens of Jupiter masses. Also, as a consequence of this evolution, diverse chemical species appear in the atmosphere of brown dwarfs. For example, water, methane, ammonia, and silicate molecules. And these molecules allow us to classify brown dwarfs into different categories: L types for the warmest brown dwarfs, T types for cooler objects, and Y types for the coldest known brown dwarfs. And brown dwarfs are analogs to planets like Jupiter because they share spectral, physical, and atmospheric parameters such as effective temperature, luminosity, radius, chemistry, and colors. So we can actually learn about planetary atmospheres by studying brown dwarfs that are easier to observe because most brown dwarfs are isolated. So we don't have like a huge or like a potential contamination by a close source. This is a neat infrared color magnitude diagram for about 4,000 brown dwarfs from the warmest to the coldest ones. And we can see this particular sequence that is explained by different phenomena. So first, for the warmest objects, the LDARs, the reddening while they dim is produced by the cooling of their atmospheres, and then this reversal is explained by the sedimentation of silicate clouds that form at earlier stages and that settle at these spectral types. So when clouds sediment, we can see deeper and hotter atmospheric layers and therefore bluer colors. We can also see here in this plot a significant scatter along the whole sequence. So in this project, we are interested in understanding what produces this scatter. So I'm going to split the presentation into results that we have for the warmest objects and for the coldest ones, with a temperature cooler than about 1000 Kelvin. So an interesting aspect of brown dwarfs is that they are sufficiently cold, even the warmest ones, to form clouds rich in chemistry. For example, clouds made of refractory oxides, silicates, and iron, salts, and water. So once these clouds form in the atmosphere, they sink into deeper atmospheric layers as the atmosphere cools. So these clouds will eventually disappear or sediment from out of the visible atmosphere, but new grains, new clouds made of lighter grains will form above. And clouds like these are not only common in brown dwarfs, but also in the atmosphere of planets in our solar system and in exoplanets. And for example, it is hypothesized that the deepest atmospheric layers of Jupiter-like planets include silicate clouds, but we cannot observe those clouds because they are beyond the atmosphere. But we can learn about silicate clouds if we study warmer or L-type brown dwarfs. And there are actually several observed phenomena attributed to silicate clouds. For example, the color anomaly of these objects. In this plot, I show here the near-infrared color as a function of the spectral type, and we see a color scatter. If we focus on mid-LDARs, we see that they could have a color change of the order of 1 magnitude. So that means that objects with a similar temperature could have a very different color. Another effect attributed to silicate clouds is variability. So it is thought that silicate clouds are inhomogeneous, so they produce a brightness change as they rotate in and out of the in and out of view. So we are interested in understanding the influence of silicate clouds in the appearance of substellar atmospheres. The only known spectral signature produced by silicate clouds is this mid-infrared silicate absorption. So the presence of this silicate absorption is indicative of cloudy atmospheres. A stronger absorption means a cloudier atmosphere. And there have been only 2 telescopes able to spectroscopically observe this absorption. One is a Spitzer that stopped observing about 4 years ago, and the other one is James Webb that started observing 2 years ago. So most of the mid-infrared observations that we have for substellar atmospheres came from Spitzer. So in this project, we've first reprocessed all the archival Spitzer mid-infrared spectra, and we put available the whole sample of 113 mid-infrared spectra. I show here a compilation of the spectra from the warmest in the top left corner to the coldest objects in the bottom left corner. And we see, I identified here the main features. We see water that is present in the spectra for the whole sample, but strengthening with a spectral type or for cooler temperatures. And ammonia and methane appears at the LT transition and also strengthened with a spectral type. But more interestingly here is the silicate absorption that can be present in the spectra for L-type, L brown dwarfs, but there is not a clear correlation between the depth of the absorption with a spectral type or temperature. For example, we can see here that for this object, 1507, there is a weak or absent silicate absorption. But for this other object that is below, that is has a similar spectral type, the absorption is very strong. And then for this object, the absorption is also weak. So we have a variety of depths for objects with similar spectral type. So we further investigated this feature, and for that, we first define a silicate index, as the ratio between where the continuum of the feature should be and where we actually measuring fluxes. So a high index means a strong absorption, and we use this index to explore this absorption in the whole sample. We measure the index in our sample and we obtain this figure. So we have here the silicate index as a function of a spectral type for the whole sample. And in the absence of silicate clouds, we should expect a decrease of the index with the spectral type, just as a consequence of the cooling of the atmospheres and the appearance of ammonia and methane features. But what we see is this bump here. So this is indicative of silicate clouds, and we can learn about the formation and evolution of clouds by inspecting this bump here. So we found that the appearance of silicate clouds occur at a temperature of about 2000 Kelvin, or a spectral type L1 to L2. Then clouds thicken in the atmosphere and they eventually disappear or sediment for objects with a temperature of about 1300 Kelvin, or a spectral type L8. So this is an illustration from a NASA's press release on this result to interpret this result. So we have that when the atmosphere is too hot, so silicate ingredients are in a gaseous state. But once the atmosphere cools enough, so silicate clouds can condense and then form clouds, and those clouds get more opaque in the atmosphere as the atmosphere cools, and then the clouds eventually sediment from the atmosphere. So this result represents the first observational determination of the emergence and sedimentation of silicate clouds in the atmosphere of warm extrasolar worlds. We have two James Webb programs to further explore the formation and evolution of silicate clouds. We have obtained mid-infrared spectra for more than 30 objects, and we are now analyzing the data to explore like this the formation in more detail. We also investigated with our sample the correlation between the silicate absorption and variability. So this is a similar plot to the one that I showed, but I highlighted here objects identified as variable in red, and also objects reported as non-variable in the literature. And we found that variable objects are about 2x more likely to be silicate-rich objects. So this result supports the idea that silicate clouds are responsible for the variability of LDARs, but we have 3 James Webb programs to confirm that silicate clouds actually drive variability in these atmospheres. In a different publication, we also analyze the correlation between the silicate absorption and surface gravity, or H. So I show here in red the combined silicate absorption for a sample of young objects, and in blue for a sample of old objects. And we see that the feature is different between both samples. So we observe that the absorption for young objects in red is redder, broader, and also has a stronger asymmetry towards longer wavelengths. So this means that the silicate absorption is sensitive to surface gravity. And to understand what could be causing these differences, we compare these observed silicate profiles two theoretical predictions for grains with different composition, different grain size, and also different crystallinity. And we found that the only way to explain this asymmetry here is by including iron grains into silicate clouds. So we have a suggestion of iron-rich silicate clouds in the atmospheres of young extrasolar atmospheres. But as we can see here, these profiles have a significant like noise because of the low signal from Spitzer spectra. So we have a Psycho-3 program that is already providing a spectra for all the objects in this plot. So we will observe 10 brown dwarfs, some young and other old ones. And we already received the first two observations for mid-infrared observations. And in addition to a higher signal, we also have higher resolution because we will use MIRI MRS that provides the highest allowable resolution with James Webb, that is about 3000 resolution. And so we will be able to also explore the crystallinity of grains in these atmospheres. A recent observation for a warm and young directly imaged exoplanets also suggest the existence of iron-rich silicates. So this is important because most modern atmospheric models fail to reproduce this silicate absorption. So maybe we are missing some chemistry in our models, and that chemistry could be, for example, these iron-rich silicates. So that's why it is important to confirm the existence of these grains, so then we can incorporate those grains into our models and hopefully to predict better our observation for substellar atmospheres. In a more recent paper, we explore the latitudinal distribution of silicate clouds. And with current telescopes, we cannot resolve different latitudes of an extrasolar atmosphere. So the way we approach this study is by observing brown dwarfs with different inclinations. So the inclination means that we tell us if we are observing like closer to the equator or near to the poles or in between of these atmospheres. So far, we have inclination measurements for about 30 objects, but we also need to have a mid-infrared spectra. So not only an inclination measurement, but also mid-infrared spectra to measure the silicate absorption. So I show here in this plot inclination in the vertical axis, silicate index or cloudiness in the horizontal axis, and then color as a auxiliary axis. And we found this strong positive correlation between the three parameters. So we found that for objects view equator on, they have a stronger silicate absorption, and they are redder compared to objects view more closer to pole on objects. So this means that clouds are concentrated or preferentially concentrated at the equator compared to the poles. And as we see here, the color scatter produced by the viewing geometry of these objects is of the order of 1 magnitude that is comparable to the color scatter that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. So that means that the color diversity or the spectral diversity of the warmest extrasolar atmospheres can be explained by their viewing geometry and the latitudinal distribution of silicate clouds. In this image, we can assimilate this result. So imagine that we are observing a cloudy atmosphere. So if we observe closer to the poles, we will observe a redder than expected color, but also a strong silicate absorption. If we observe higher latitudes, we will have a more normal color with a weak silicate absorption. But if we observe closer to the poles, we will see a bluer color with a weak or a very weak silicate absorption. So if we put all this information together, this is how a cloudy substellar atmosphere should look like. That is redder at the equator and bluer as we move towards the poles. We have another James Webb program that already obtained the spectra for a number of young brown dwarfs with different inclination to explore this correlation in more detail. So now let me go back to this color magnitude diagram, and now with the results that I presented, so we are able to explain the color scatter for the warmest objects, but by invoking clouds and their viewing geometry. But now the question is, what happens for the coldest objects? Because silicate clouds cannot be responsible for this color scatter, because silicate clouds should be beyond the visible atmosphere for these cold objects. So it could be maybe clouds made of lighter grains, for example, salt or water, or maybe gravity, metallicity, or non-equilibrium chemistry. So we explore these possibilities in a James Webb Cycle 1 program that observed a number of cold brown dwarfs. So I show here another color magnitude diagram using mid-infrared magnitudes, and we see a significant scatter. So here the curve corresponds to the median brightness for different colors. And for this program, we selected objects with different colors and being brighter and fainter than the average, but also including some normal objects. So we observed in total a total of 12 late T and white dwarfs with near spec and mirroring. So we obtained near infrared spectra with the highest resolution with James Webb, that is in this case about 3,000. And also we obtained mid-infrared photometry at 10 microns, 13 microns, and 18 microns to constrain the spectral energy distributions for these objects. So we reprocess all the observations using the James Webb calibration pipeline to optimize the extraction and also playing with non-default parameters. So this is the amazing resulting sample of a spectra. I'm showing here the warmest objects at the top and the coldest ones at the bottom. And I'm also highlighting the main spectral features in the sample. We see ammonia, methane, CO2, CO, and water. And interestingly here, we observe that some of these features don't correlate with temperature. For example, the CO2 feature in these two objects is very different, even if they have a similar temperature. So the CO2 feature is very strong for the object at the bottom and weak or very weak for this other reference object with a similar temperature. And the same is happening for the warmest size of our sample. So also a CO2 diversity for objects with similar temperature, but also we obtain a similar result for the CO feature. So we have here a strong absorption for the purple spectrum and a flat spectrum or a weak absorption for the black spectrum. So we have a variety of CO2 and CO fissures in our sample for objects with similar temperatures. Another difference, and really interesting difference, is about 3.3 microns. So if we observe this region, we observe that most of our spectra have a flat fissure, but this object 1935 has this bump here. So I'm going to discuss this bump and also this other fissure in my next slides. So we are working on several papers with this sample to model and interpret our observation individually and also as a whole. There is also a complementary Cycle 1 project by Mike Cushing that observes near-infrared and mid-infrared spectra for 24 cold brown dwarfs, and this sample is helping us to interpret our observations. So, is there a question?
Sorry, Saltiris, do you have a question?
No. I accidentally pressed the audio, sorry.
Okay, so I don't understand. Is there a question or?
No. There's no question. Please go ahead.
Okay,
Sorry
perfect.
for the interruption.
No worries. Okay, so now back to the bump at 3.3 microns that I mentioned. So this is a zoom in that region, and we have here in blue the spectrum for the object with the bump, and in white the spectrum for a reference object that has a similar temperature but without the bump. So this fissure actually corresponds to methane in emission. And to explain what could be causing this emission, we modeled our spectra using the Brewster retrieval framework, and we obtained that to obtain this methane in emission, we need a temperature inversion in the PT profile, a inversion of about 200 Kelvin in the top atmosphere. So we think that this inversion could be produced by auroral activity in the atmosphere of this object. We published this result in this Nature paper this year, and this modeling was obtained to only near-infrared spectra, but we are exploring the mid-infrared prediction by the best retrieved spectrum in black here, and compared to the prediction by a model without the temperature inversion. And we see these significant differences between both spectra. So we obtained that the model with a temperature inversion predict a weaker water, methane, and ammonia fissures compared to the spectrum without the inversion. So we are still understanding these differences because it appears that the temperature inversion is like destroying some of these molecules. We also compare the retrieved spectra to modern atmospheric models, and actually those models fail to explain the best retrieved spectrum. So now let me discuss this diversity of CO2 and CO. So first, we look at predictions by theoretical models. So we have here models with the same temperature, the same gravity, but different chemical equilibrium. So we have in green here, we have in blue an atmosphere in chemical equilibrium. In red, we have, in black, we have atmospheres with non-equilibrium chemistry due to vertical mixing, and for the red spectrum due to a weak vertical mixing, and for the black spectrum due to a strong vertical mixing. So we observe a diversity of the CO2 and CO fissure due to vertical mixing. And this is consistent with the diversity that we observe in our spectra. So we observe that the fissure is flat for objects in chemical equilibrium, and the absorption is strong for objects out of chemical equilibrium. And also the same for the CO fissure. So we found that this equilibrium chemistry significantly influences the near-infrared spectra of the coldest brown dwarfs. But this is not the only parameter affecting the observation. So in this plot, now I'm showing a spectra with the same temperature, same vertical mixing, but different gravity. And we also see a color diversity. We see that the CO2 and CO fissures are stronger in younger or low gravity objects. So gravity could also shape this spectral region, but not as much as this equilibrium chemistry. We are exploring this phenomena more formally using retrieval techniques for all our spectra here, but I'm going to show here results for only one object. So that object is one of the warmest ones in our sample, for which we present to our knowledge the most complete spectral energy distribution, going from the optical to up to 20 microns using different telescopes. We have a Keck, observation by Keck, IRTF, Magellan, Akari, James Webb, and Spitzer. And so with this ensemble of observation, we are capturing most of the light emitted by this object. These are the cross sections of the main features expected in the atmosphere of this object that help us to identify the main feature in the spectrum. So we have a strong water and methane absorption in the near infrared, and CO2 and CO fissures in the James Webb coverage, and also water, methane, and ammonia in the mid infrared, and potentially CO2 as well. So we model this spectral energy distribution using the Chimera framework and with a different combination of spectra. And we found that the pressure temperature profile is better constrained when using the protest available SED. And these are the fits to the observations. So with this modeling, and also because of the essentially full SED, we were able to precisely constrain physical parameters and chemical abundances for this object. We are also using this spectral energy distribution to evaluate the performance of modern atmospheric models. So I show here the comparison to the ALMO 2020 models, and we obtained that the best fits have non-equilibrium atmospheres. These are results from comparisons to a different grid by Lacey and Burros 2023, and we also found that the best fits have a non-equilibrium chemistry. And in general, these models decently reproduce the full SED, but with some challenges in specific regions. But this forward modeling favors the presence or the favor non-equilibrium chemistry in the atmosphere of these objects. And for this forward modeling analysis, we developed a Python package called SEDA, a Spectral Energy Distribution Analyzer, that will be released in this publication and that allow us to compare spectrophotometry to different widely used and recent atmospheric models. The code is already on GitHub in this with a QR code, so to be available for the community. So this is my summary. So we found that the appearance of the warmest extrasolar atmospheres can be explained by their viewing geometry and the concentration of clouds at the equator. So these results are published in this paper series, and they are obtained using mainly Spitzer observations. But we have now James Webb observation for similarly warm objects to explore these results in more detail, and also to investigate the coldest atmospheres, for which we have suggestion that the coldest atmospheres are highly influenced by non-equilibrium chemistry due to vertical mixing. So that's all, and happy to take any questions.
So for the audience online, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. And is there any other questions in the room? So I have a question, Genaro. So you explained on the silicate features for different planets from different viewing angles. So in that plot, I don't really, maybe I miss it, see the how much in the flux levels that would be affected. So for example, in the magnitude or the flux, how much would that be affected by the viewing angles here?
Yeah, the flux is will be a significant difference, because in magnitude it's up to 1 magnitude. So then we can convert that magnitude difference into flux, but that's a clear difference in the spectra. So as I show here, so this is these are spectral differences produced by different inclination for objects with a similar temperature. So this difference cannot be produced by temperature, at least fully explained by temperature, but is decently reproduced by different inclinations. So we can see that the flux difference is huge and can be attributed to viewing geometry.
So for these differences we see for different spectrums, can other free parameters also make the similar change? Or this is mainly due to, or mostly due to the viewing angles?
There are other parameters that will contribute to these differences, but the main one that we found that is shaping the mid-infrared observation is silicate clouds. But we can see in this correlation, I highlighted in squares young atmospheres, and in circles old atmospheres. And we see a suggestion that, for example, gravity, that young objects have a cloudier atmosphere if they have like similar inclinations. So gravity could also like favor the presence of silicates, but in general, like most of the correlation is like traced by viewing geometry. But we would also like to explore, for example, if metallicity could affect this, because I would expect that a higher metallicity will favor the formation of heavy molecules such as silicates. So I don't know, maybe like supersolar atmosphere, metallicity atmosphere will have like cloudier atmospheres, but we don't have like enough data now to say something on metallicity.
And thank you. Is there any other questions? Last call for questions. Okay, if there's no other questions, let's thank our speaker again. And thank you, Genaro, for presenting this amazing work.
Thanks for the invitation. See you. Thank you.
Stop it.